society. The second is that now society needs a code of law. And this continues. I like to continue, but then I want also to have some time for you to ask questions. So maybe I stop here, because anyway we cannot finish whatever all the things that Khaja has said, and then Fazil Ishara, it takes time. So inshallah next session we can finish this chapter. So if you have any questions, any comments, please put forward. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Just a quick question on what Ibn Sina mentions on about one of the reasons he's introducing the need of religion and Sharia, that he's referring to mu'amalatun wa adlun yahfazuhu ash-shar. Because people interact with one another, to ensure that the interactions are regulated, therefore there's the need for religion.
Yes.
One might argue and say that, but don't governments, don't lawmakers, don't parliaments provide that kind of regulation and legal system to be able to regulate these things? And then so what's the difference? And then the response could be that, well, the deen which is from God is better to follow because it's less prone to mistakes, it's coming from the absolute lawmaker. Therefore, it makes sense to follow what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what the divine ruling and legal system is than some, parliament members or ministers or whatever come up with law, this man-made law. So it could be, it could be wrong or it could be mistaken. So that could be the answer. But then the other side could say that, but even when you're trying to implement what this divine lawmaker is saying, because you think that that's the best way, because he knows the best for everyone, it is going to be dependent on people's interpretation of that deen, which could also be mistaken, which could also be wrong, because it's not a divine law, it's not absolute, it's not a ma'soom prescribing that. It could be it's a human being, and he might be mistaken in his understanding of religion. Therefore, what could be the difference? What would be the difference of following a, if you like, so-called secular or just, a legal system, which also provides these regulations with regards to justice and interactions and etc., than following something which is godly, so to speak, but it's people's interpretations of that, and at the end could have a negative impact on God as well, because if people misunderstand it and implement it wrongly, then people would be attributing this to God, because they were saying this is God's law which is meant to be just, but this is how it is. So how do we kind of resolve this this situation? I hope I've been able to explain my question properly.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. In Aqaid, when we discuss about the need for religion, we discuss this, that why we need divine law. This is, of course, one way of arguing, because there are different ways. We can use miracles, we can argue for the existence of God and say, okay, if God with these characteristics exists, then we have to follow his guidance. So there are many ways to argue for that, but one way that hukama and philosophers do follow, and we mention in Aqaid when we talk about the need for religious law, especially in the discussion about Nubuwwah, is that we need laws which are not biased, which are not self-interested, which are not imposed by people who have power, by dictators, or people who have somehow physical dominance. A law which is free from any selfishness, any self-interest, that can only come from God or godly people like prophets. Plus, the only one who knows human beings and knows their needs, and his knowledge is not, shallow, because we know that in the course of history how many times changes have happened. Even right now we have many countries, and you don't find even two countries who have the same law, even if they think that they are driven by science and human experience. You see, they are different. Even in different time, when one government is elected, they change the law. So there are so many issues when human beings undertake making the law that would not make it possible to rely on human law. But your question is, what about human interpretation of divine law? This is a very important question. The answer is that first, let's clear this for the time that prophets are there, because Khaja or Ibn Sina are talking about the need for Nabi. We are not now talking about the time after prophets. We are now talking about Nabi. So Nabi is Ma'soom. Nabi is the one who brings law from God and explains in an infallible way to us. So we must go by that. Then after Nabi, what should we do? We should have an instruction from Nabi about how to understand that law. And this is also given by the Prophet, to go to Ahlul Bayt and to Quran. How to solve the problem in the time of Ghaibah? Again, they said now you go to ulama who have the best knowledge. So we have divine law, and then we try to go to the best available access through a methodology to have the best available access to that divine law. And we cannot say because we may make mistakes in understanding divine law, so it's equal to not having any divine law. No, it's very much different, because first of all, many things are very clear. There are many things that they don't need any ijtihad or any interpretation. For example, many things that we have in our Sharia about, for example, not cheating, not killing, not robbing, keeping your promises, many things are clear. Many things about, for example, ibadat, fasting, are agreed upon. There are details. For those details which are not actually that much affecting the spirit of the law, then we go to mujtahideen. But this difference between maraja is not making one person vicious, another person virtuous. These are very detailed differences. The main boundaries are set up by religion, and we all agree. For example, Muslim way of life, maybe 60-70% is agreed upon, if you want to consider the general boundaries of Muslim way of life. Haya for us is very important. Respect for the rights of people is very important. Security is important. Taking care of poor people, elderly people, needy people. This is Muslim way of life. This is what we learn from God, compared to secular law that can be very much different. Sometimes they become too much liberal. Sometimes they don't bother about anyone other than themselves, unless there is a legal. I hope this answered your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. May Allah bless you. Is there any other question?
There is one question.
Yes.
An opponent might say that the explanation of Ibn Sina is aligned with those that say that religion is not real, but something that is a social construct to organize human life. How can we reply?
it's very much different. Ibn Sina doesn't say that it's the society who makes religion. He says, because we have to live in society, we need law, and this law cannot come from the society, because then it would not have sanction. It should come from God, who would provide this person with some exclusive signs like miracles, and therefore people have to obey him. But those people who say that reality is made by society, they say everything comes from society and ends with the society.
Thank you so much, Sheikh.
You're welcome.
Sorry, just a one follow-up on what you explained.
Yeah.
If you mentioned 60-70% or 50-60%, everyone agrees on, and the main principles about feeding the poor, about haya, etc., which so it makes it clear. But then one might argue that those generalities, then the human intellect itself also is able to decipher those things. So some lawmakers can sit together and come up with those general rulings, which the Shara also endorses, because it's in line with the intellect.
Not unfortunately, because it's not impossible, but this is not the case, because when these rational people come together, over time their rationality can be clouded by media, by trends. So for example, in some countries certain types of family were illegal. Now not only they are legalized, they want to normalize it, and they want to ask everyone to sanction it. So what has happened? We cannot say these are not any more rational people. Yes, they are still rational people, but they don't go by rationality. Their rationality is clouded. So there are many issues like this. Imagine, for example, about how much we should care for environment, for the earth. Now you see, big governments differ. Some say we have to commit ourselves. Some say no. So if we want to go by what is today agreed by all reasonable people, maybe we would have 30%, 40% agreement. If we want to go by Abrahamic faith, maybe 40, 50%. But if we go by Muslim way of life in general, maybe 60%. If you want to go by Shia, maybe 70, 80. But if you want to be 100% clear or 90% clear, then we have to have also our marja. So the marja is not from 0 to 90. Marja makes it clear for us, 10, 20%, but on the top, which is the details and, lots of things,
I don't want to prolong this, but even on that, because you mentioned about the implication that irrational people, over time they might become unbiased, or they might be deceived by power or by money, etc.
Yes.
Therefore, yes, on a rational perspective, yes, these 67%, it's endorsed by the app. But when it comes to practice, because these are human beings, and that they could be clouded by different motives. But we can say the same thing about that divine law. The law itself is fine, but again, when it comes to implementing it by a non-ma'soom, they can also be clouded by power and position, etc.
Yes. So
the outcome of it might be the same thing, with the repercussion of the one which is done in the name of religion, in the name of divine law, because it's clouded by these individuals. Then people would say, okay, what sort of a divine law it is that this is the implication. Whilst the other one, which is clouded, will say, okay, it's not working 100% because the person is after power, but at least they don't turn away from religion.
Yes, that's possible, and sometimes in the name of religion, tragedies have happened. But what is important is that in Islam, and especially in the school of Ahlul Bayt, we have the requirement of justice and knowledge together, not just knowledge and justice. and Quran blames the people that they followed their scholars even if they were known not to be pious. So we as Muslims have to be very careful to go to the people who have the best knowledge, but also known without any doubt to be pious. Otherwise the same problems can happen to us, that in the name of Islam the most terrible things can happen, as we see about ISIS and others already. So you can have the best religion, but people can make tragedies in the name of that religion. So knowledge is very important. People like ISIS, normally they don't have deep knowledge. And also piety, justice. That's very, very important. If there is alim and who is known to be pious, then the mistakes would be very minimal, and that type of minimal mistakes would not make a huge difference.
Very much, Sheikh.
Ahsantum, thank you very much. May Allah bless you, and may Allah inshallah help us to understand Islam properly and inshallah act upon it completely. Thank you. Jazakumullah khairan. Look forward to seeing you inshallah next week.